In this lesson, we'll be focusing on paragraphs, sentences, and words. In my experience, one of the most difficult parts of writing is sitting down and actually starting to write. After all, writing an essay is not usually most people's favorite thing to do. We procrastinate because we dread it, and then we become anxious about not getting it done, creating a sort of snowball effect of stress that just makes you loathe writing even more. When I asked students what makes them so grumpy about writing, I got answers like, "It's hard," "I'm terrible at it," and "there's too many rules." This got me thinking. Maybe students hate to write because they think they need to follow a very strict set of standards in form, content, punctuation, and grammar. With so many rules, students are more apt to making mistakes, which means lower grades and ugly red marks all over their papers when they're handed back. Because of this, they despise writing and take very little risks to make improvements. This is why I decided to dedicate the first part of this lesson to going over some of these rules, to separate writing myths from writing truths, to get rid of the confusing standards that may have been ingrained into your brain since high school, and to show you the difference between what is really required in your writing versus the more flexible areas that allow you to explore your creativity and really put your critical thinking to work. From the essay as a whole to paragraphs, sentences, and even individual words, the goal here is to help you establish confidence in your writing and to promote the idea of taking risks and stepping out of your comfort zone, which, based on most student responses, is probably not all that comfy anyway. Let's start by taking a look at the most widely taught essay format, which typically consists of an introduction that includes your thesis statement, a handful of body paragraphs that support your thesis, and a conclusion that restates your thesis and main ideas. Truth, for the most part, all three of these items are necessary components of a good essay. However, don't be fooled by the common notion that your thesis statement must be located within your first paragraph, or, as some more particular teachers require, as the last sentence of your first paragraph. Though this is a good rule of thumb often taught by high school teachers to help students get the hang of organizing an essay, it's not an absolute requirement. In fact, professional writers and scholars sometimes use more than one paragraph as their introduction, which means that the thesis may not be found until paragraph 2 or 3. The key to good thesis placement is to remember that your point needs to be made to the reader early on in the writing. Again, whether this is at the end of the first paragraph or the first chapter really just depends on the overall length of the work. For example, in a typical short essay, like the ones we'll be writing in this class, it would make the most sense to place the thesis in the first paragraph. Your reader shouldn't have to make it halfway through your writing to finally figure out what the point of it is. Myth number 2, introductions must be only one paragraph. In a long article or book, the entire first chapter might serve as the author's introduction, subsequently moving the thesis even further into the writing. The introduction's length is dependent on how long the writing will be in its entirety. The introductions and essays written for this class, for example, really only need to be about one paragraph. Myth number 3. Other teachers have stressed a need for exactly 3 supporting examples to be included in the body paragraphs. Again, though this is generally a good number for the average short essay, it's not a strict rule that you have to follow. What you really need is enough examples to strongly support your thesis. Enough can differ according to both your topic and the assigned length of your essay. So it would be unwise for me to tell you to use an exact number of examples, though again, I can understand why teachers might have made this suggestion to you as a rookie writer. The final myth, as far as overall essay formatting goes, is the idea that all a conclusion needs to do is restate your thesis and main points. Though these parts are necessary, it is important that you achieve this in light of the new information you have presented. Think about how your supporting examples in your body paragraphs have proved your thesis and refuted counter-arguments. Depending on the purpose of your essay, whether it be to inform, to persuade, etc., many conclusions end up with a clinching statement that invites the reader to help make a change, a call to action, or by describing a scenario that might happen if your argument was accepted, the better world scenario, or rejected, the worst case scenario. Again, all this depends on what kind of essay you are writing and what point you are trying to get across to your readers. Now that we've looked at the essay as a whole, let's shift our focus to the paragraph. When I was first taught how to write a paragraph, I was told that each one should start with a topic sentence followed by a particular number of supporting sentences. The teacher drilled into our heads that a paragraph is not a paragraph unless it contains at least 5 sentences. Don't fall for this myth. Every paragraph need not fall into this perfect textbook-defined cookie-cutter mold. Experienced writers don't start with form and fill in the content. Instead, they begin by drafting the content first and discover the form as they go. Additionally, the topic sentence need not be the very first sentence in a paragraph. Here are a few things about paragraphs that you should keep in mind. Paragraphs make a promise to the reader. When you read the first sentence of a paragraph, you automatically begin to form an assumption about what the paragraph is going to be about. Take a look at this paragraph about the urban yard as an example. There are lots of different ways to maximize your use of space, however tiny your plot. Think vertically. Grow climbing beans up walls, tie in a grapevine along a trellis, and train fruit trees as space-saving espaliers. Tuck a worm bin into a corner and catch rainwater in a rain barrel. Don't forget wildlife even in the city. Plant nectar-rich flowers in among vegetables to attract pollinating insects and keep a bird feeder well stocked to encourage birds into your yard that will munch their way through insect pests. If you want to keep livestock, you don't need much space for a couple of chickens and a movable ark, and you'll have the satisfaction of eating your own eggs for breakfast. The first sentence, which in this case is also the topic sentence, makes a promise to the reader. We automatically assume that the rest of the paragraph will list several ways to maximize the use of a small plot of land, and it does. If it didn't, then the writer has failed to follow through with his promise to the reader and needs to revise the paragraph. Next, paragraphs need to be coherent. What does this mean? Think about everyday speech, for example. A typical response to the question, "How was your day?" might go something like this. My day was pretty good. I went to work and finally got the raise I was waiting for. I also ate some really good soup from lunch from that new restaurant down the street. At the end of the day, I stopped by the gym and had a great workout. In this example, we can see that there is a logical connection or coherence between each sentence or complete thought of the paragraph. As a whole, the paragraph deals with one topic, describing a woman's day. The topic sentence promises to tell us reasons as to why her day was good. The remaining sentences list these 3 reasons. Just like everyday conversations such as this one, paragraphs should have an easy-to-decipher, logical train of thought. But let's look a little deeper and talk about how exactly these sentences relate to one another. In a well-developed paragraph, the second sentence must be related to the first sentence in some way. This relationship can either be coordinating or subordinating. Elements that coordinate will be similar or equal in nature, while elements that subordinate have an unequal relationship, meaning that one depends on the other. In our previous example paragraph, the first sentence promises to tell us how the woman's day was good. The second sentence is subordinate to the first sentence because it depends on the first sentence. It gives a specific example as to why her day was good. The next 2 sentences do the same thing, listing 2 more equal reasons as to why her day was good, making them coordinate with each other. Experienced writers will develop paragraphs that are more complex. Let's take a look at this one, for example. Why are low-calorie diets dangerous? Basically, they prevent us from getting all the nutrients we need. When we reduce our intake of food, we also cut back on essential vitamins and minerals needed to stay healthy. One recent survey of a dozen popular diets found all of them deficient in the U.S. recommended daily allowances for 13 vitamins and minerals. Even though vitamin supplements may correct some nutritional deficiencies, dieters may not notice that they are also getting less fiber and water than they were before. In this paragraph, the first sentence promises to answer the question, why are low-calorie diets dangerous? The second sentence gives us an answer to this question. They prevent us from getting all the nutrients we need, making it subordinate to or dependent on the first. The third sentence gives us an explanation as to how low-calorie diets prevent us from getting the nutrients we need. If we reduce our intake, we reduce our vitamins and minerals. This makes the third sentence subordinate to the second sentence. The fourth sentence of the paragraph is evidence that supports what sentence 3 just told us, making it subordinate to the third. The fifth and final sentence of the paragraph does not continue to expand on this evidence. Instead, it relates back to the third sentence by giving us a second explanation as to how low-calorie meals prevent us from getting nutrients, making it coordinate with the third sentence and subordinate to the second sentence. This method of creating levels and indentions of sentences to show their relationships is known as generative rhetoric, and it's explained in Francis Christensen's Notes Toward a New Rhetoric. Pretty easy, right? Ready to take the next step? Remember how I told you earlier that the topic sentence doesn't always need to be the very first sentence in a paragraph? Well, it's true. And just as Christensen's model of generative rhetoric stacks its sentences in a way that shows you visually how the sentences relate to each other, imagining paragraphs as shapes can also help you to see these relationships. Each paragraph structure has a different effect on the flow of the paragraph. The inverted triangle paragraph begins with the topic sentence followed by subsequent subordinating sentences. Let's look at this example. Typhoon Chris hit with full fury today on the central coast of Japan. High waves carried many homes into the sea. Heavy rain from the storm flooded the area. People now fear that the heavy rains may have caused mudslides in the central part of the country. The number of victims buried under the mud may climb past the 200 mark by Saturday. The regular triangle paragraph builds up to the topic sentence with subordinate sentences. If the wind becomes gusty suddenly after being calm, you may need to start looking for shelter. If you see clouds becoming darker, you may need shelter right away. Naturally, you know that thunder and lightning mean a storm is coming. Keep in mind that bright lightning doesn't mean a storm is coming. The number of lightning flashes is important, though. The more lightning flashes, the worse the storm is likely to be. The signs of a thunderstorm are many, and being able to understand them can be important. The diamond-shaped paragraph places the topic sentence in the middle, with subordinate sentences leading up to and then away from it. Dark green leafy vegetables such as kale and spinach are good sources of vitamin C and iron. Carrots, squash, and sweet potatoes are good sources of carotene, which the body changes into vitamin A. All vegetables are good for us because they provide important vitamins and minerals that build cells and keep us healthy. Vitamin C, for example, builds strong teeth and helps us resist infections. Vitamin A keeps skin healthy and protects our eyes. Iron, also an important part of vegetables, builds red blood cells. Finally, the hourglass paragraph begins with the topic sentence and ends by restating it, with subordinating sentences in between. Glaciers change the surface of the earth. They grind heavily as they move slowly along, much like the fresh cement creeping down a gentle slope. They dig great holes in the sides of mountains and rub away the faces of rocks. A glacier pushes masses of loose soil and rock ahead of it. The loose soil and rocks form ridges when the ice melts or stops moving. A moving glacier also makes a valley wider as it pushes down through it. The earth looks quite different after a glacier has passed by. Now you might be thinking, why the hell are we diagramming paragraphs like this? The answer goes back to coherence. Diagramming paragraphs shows you exactly how sentences are related to each other in a paragraph, and this is a must if you want your paragraph to be considered coherent, which you do. So as you're developing your own paragraphs, try to create a mental diagram of your paragraph by using one or both of these methods to make sure that each sentence is connected by the one overall topic that you promised the reader in your topic sentence. If you come across a sentence in your paragraph that can't be related back to your overall topic, then that sentence does not belong in the paragraph. Finally, be sure to put your sentences in an order that makes logical sense and help the reader follow your train of thought by adding transition words and phrases. Ready to have your mind blown? The same methods of generative rhetoric we just applied to paragraphs can also be applied to the essay as a whole. For example, a typical essay begins with an introduction that works its way from general to specific, ending with the thesis statement. This type of paragraph, as we discussed earlier, looks like an inverted triangle. Additionally, a typical essay ends with a conclusion that first restates your thesis and then reviews the supporting material, forming a regular triangle. The body paragraphs in the middle of an essay serve as your support for your thesis and are sandwiched in between the introduction and the conclusion, forming an hourglass shape. All of the different body paragraphs can be shaped differently according to how the author wants to get his message across. The hourglass isn't the only available shape for writing. A newspaper article, for example, begins with the most important information first and can be seen as an inverted triangle. A fictional story can take the shape of a diamond. It begins with the exposition, followed by the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and ends with the denouement or resolution. Coming up next, a discussion of the two remaining parts of writing, sentences and words. If you feel like you need to take a break, now would probably be a good time. When it comes to writing sentences, most students tend to make one of two mistakes. They either write sentences that are too simple or they write sentences that are too complex. Check out the following group of sentences. The national debt concerns Americans. The national debt grows $30,000 every second. The national debt totals over $18 trillion. Though these sentences get the message across, they are short and choppy, overly simplistic, and appear as though they could have been written by a student in elementary school rather than college. If this is a problem that you struggle with, consider sentence combining. Here's a few examples of ways that these sentences can be combined to make one sentence. The national debt concerns Americans because it grows $30,000 every second and totals over $18 trillion. The national debt, a concern for Americans, grows $30,000 every second and totals over $18 trillion. The national debt, growing $30,000 every second and totaling over $18 trillion, concerns Americans. Americans are concerned about the national debt, which grows $30,000 every second and totals over $18 trillion. Because the national debt grows $30,000 every second and totals over $18 trillion, it concerns Americans. Notice how each of these examples conveys a slightly different meaning or tone. You can practice creating different structures like these to find the one that best conveys your message. Additionally, arranging consecutive sentences in different ways adds variety to your writing. Like music, writing in sentence variety gives your prose a natural rhythm similar to that of speech. This is one reason why reading your paper out loud can help you to hear clarity issues within your writing. Other students struggle with writing sentences that may be too complex, which can tend to twist the syntax and convolute the meaning. For them, practice with decombining sentences may be a better choice. Here's an example of an overly complex sentence from a freshman student's essay. The things that people go to the pharmacist for sometimes are just to get the pharmacist to prescribe them something for their illness, and he cannot do any prescribing for anyone for medicine. Here, the student confuses the reader by trying to squish too much information into one sentence. Most of the time, students write sentences like these knowing that it sounds weird, but not knowing how to fix it. For these students, I suggest sentence decombining, which breaks down complex sentences into simple sentences like this. People go to the pharmacist for things. People go to the pharmacist sometimes. People just get the pharmacist to prescribe something for their illnesses. He cannot do any prescribing. He cannot prescribe for anyone. He cannot prescribe medicine. Right away, it becomes obvious that the sentence contains more than one subject, people and the pharmacist. Rewording the sentence to focus on only one subject gives the student several options to choose from. People as subject. People sometimes go to the pharmacist who cannot prescribe medicine for anyone just to get him to prescribe something for their illness. Sometimes people go to the pharmacist just to get him to prescribe medicine for their illness, something he cannot do. Pharmacist as subject. The pharmacist cannot prescribe medicine for anyone's illness, even though people sometimes ask him to. This is a little better. Although people sometimes ask the pharmacist to prescribe medicine for their illness, he cannot write prescriptions. To me, this one sounds the best. As you can see, decombining overly complex sentences can help you identify and fix a number of structural problems. No matter what issues you may have when forming sentences, sentence combining and decombining helps you to learn to develop sentences that are clearer, more complex, and full of variety. The last element of writing we'll go over in this video is how to choose the right words. Word choice can make a huge difference in your writing. For example, it can add different rhetorical effects, make your writing more or less clear, and change the tone of your writing. The term tone refers to choices that writers make about words, diction, and even sentence structure. Before you choose your tone, though, it's important to keep 3 things in mind. Subject. What you're writing about plays a big role in word choice. For example, an owner's manual for a vacuum cleaner might sound very plain, using technical jargon and giving directions that are clear and easy to understand. On the other hand, writing about a trip to the beach will likely sound more playful and light. Audience. Your audience also makes a difference in the tone that you choose. Imagine writing a family member a quick note versus writing an email to your boss. You should plan to use more formal language in the professional world. This includes any essays that you might write for college courses. Purpose. Lastly, word choice is also dependent on your purpose for writing. If your purpose is to persuade someone to share your point of view on a topic, you should aim for a tone that exudes confidence and assertiveness while avoiding undue emotion. However, if your purpose is to entertain, aim for a lighter tone. Finally, whenever possible, choose words that emphasize the active voice over the passive voice. The reason for this is that the passive voice is typically more wordy and can tend to make your meaning unclear. To identify a passive construction, first find the verb. In an active construction, the subject of the sentence directly performs the action, while in a passive construction, the subject receives the action. For example, active. The dog bit the man. Passive. The man was bitten by the dog. Sometimes writers omit the by phrase. Don't let this fool you. For example, the books were taken. Susan's draft was discussed. Our taxes were increased. To make passive sentences active, bring the subject from the by phrase closer to the beginning of the sentence. If the subject has been omitted, add one accordingly. For example, someone took the books. Our class discussed Susan's draft. The city council increased our taxes. As you can see, converting a sentence in the passive voice to the active voice often removes an unnecessary usage of the verb to be and makes the sentence more direct overall. Let's conclude with a quick review of paragraphs, sentences, and words. First, we went over some writing truths and myths, like where the thesis should go, how long an introduction should be, and how a conclusion should be constructed. Then we talked a little bit about paragraphs and how topic sentences make a promise to the reader. We also discussed paragraph coherence by diagramming sentences of a paragraph to show how each sentence was related to the next through either coordination or subordination. Next, we talked about sentences, and I showed you how you can use sentence combining to turn short, choppy sentences into more complex structures. I also showed you how to use sentence decombining to make overly complex sentences more manageable. And finally, we went over words and how the tone you choose should depend on your subject, audience, and purpose. The last thing we discussed was how to use the active voice in writing. I hope that this video has given you a greater understanding of how to use paragraphs, sentences, and words in your writing. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.